Hi, hi everyone. I'm Karthik Ramakrishnan, founder and executive director of AAPI Data, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to a timely and important webinar, One in Five Priorities of AAPI Californians. What one in five refers to is one out of every five eligible voters in California. Now, I've been looking and analyzing data for many years now, and even I was pleasantly surprised that we are close to one in five adult citizens in California who are eligible to vote, including in this very important set of primaries, including for the next governor of California. That is the backdrop for this event today. In order to better understand and to serve and represent our communities, we need to look at data, and I'll be presenting some of the important survey data that we've done in partnership with other community organizations to better understand the needs and priorities of our community. But it needs to go beyond data. We'll be hearing from community leaders in the nonprofit sector and in government agencies and in elected office to hear from their perspective and expertise on what everyone needs to know about our communities. We also hear from next generation talent, including researchers who are not only analyzing the current status quo in our communities, but what needs to change in order to strengthen not only our communities, but California. So with that, I'll turn it over to Annie Lee, Policy Director from CAA.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Lee, and I'm the Managing Director of Policy for Chinese for Affirmative Action, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's webinar. We will start with hearing from Assembly Member Darshana Patel, then transition into insights from AAPI data surveys, and Karthik will walk us through some really interesting data there. Third, we will have a panel, an illustrious panel, that will talk about how do we transform data into action, especially now during an election year. Fourth, we'll be joined by State Senator Chris Cabaldon, who will also talk about Asian American representation as well as action. And then lastly, we'll have calls to action, including a moderated panel and some actionable next steps that folks can take because we want you to be able to walk away from this webinar knowing exactly what we can all do to support AAPI communities throughout California. So without further ado, it is my deep pleasure to introduce Assemblymember Patel, who represents the 76th District, and she is a research scientist as well as a mom and former school board president. So welcome, Assemblymember Patel.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's an honor to be with you and have the opportunity to speak on something I am so passionate about. My name is Dr. Darshana Patel, as you just learned, and I represent the 76th Assembly District, which is North Inland San Diego. But before I was a legislator, I was a research scientist, and I was trained to ask, what does the evidence actually say? And I now bring that same discipline to public policy, and that data discipline is the topic of conversation today. I'm the chair of the Assembly Education Committee, and I sit on the Health, Higher Education, Budget, and Economic Development Committees. Every single one of those committees asks the same foundational question. Are our institutions actually working for the people they were built to serve? Californians' institutions have the potential to change lives. We know that. We can change society. We can change our future. It's our systems of education that have led to some of the largest technical developments happening right here in California. The smartphone, Wi-Fi, and AI are all inextricably linked to California institutions. But the question remains of who can access these institutions that are home to innovation and a pathway to upward mobility. And how can we best ensure that all people are able to capitalize on this critical infrastructure? As a member of the Health Committee, healthcare follows a similar arc with more severe consequences. California's healthcare system is a story of the haves and have-nots, and knowing how the government can most effectively target services to those in need before a crisis ensures that lives are not lost. Representation without this information is falling short of what the government can truly offer. If we don't know who our constituents are, what they need, where they struggle, and whether our programs are reaching them, then we are governed by assumptions and incomplete information. And that's because we lack the data. And that's why the work of AAPI Data is the work that they're doing is so critical. This isn't just data collection. We all know that. It's the prerequisite for accountable governance, the foundation on which effective policy is built. Hard, disaggregated data replaces anecdotes with evidence and assumption with action. The importance of data is also why I authored AB 1878. Data policy might not be the flashiest policy area or end up on the news cycle, but it's quite frankly fundamental and is a cornerstone in every piece of policy that makes the real change Californians want to see in their state. I'm honored to have AAPI Data and the California Commission on APIA Affairs as co-sponsors on this critical legislation. As a former commissioner on API Affairs, this idea came to me from conversations I had with community members while in the commission, and I saw a critical loophole and a need to pull this forward. This bill standardized the precise collection of race and ethnicity data across state agencies so that every facet of our community is seen and their needs are heard. That's pretty basic for government. The result is that communities are far better represented, programs are more effective, and frankly, taxpayers go further. In these tough budget times, that's what we're looking for. Without this work, there will always be a ceiling on how well any of our representatives can serve their constituents. I am proud to be in this room working alongside so many committed advocates and policymakers to define what representation needs to look like in the 21st century. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Patel. Those were rousing remarks about the importance of data, and I can think of no better segue than to now introduce Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan, who, as he said earlier, helped found and now leads AAPI Data. And I will pass it to you now, Karthik.
Thank you so much, Annie, and Assemblymember Patel. Thank you for not only being so eloquent, but showing the power that data has to reveal and to make sure that our communities are prioritized in the important conversations, not only in Sacramento, but throughout the state. I'll just make a couple of announcements about the work that we're doing in California. In addition to our research and our work on data policy, we also do a lot of work with community members. We're also trying to see the next generation of leaders in California and to make sure that we hear from them in terms of their visions for the future. So we have two events happening in less than 2 weeks. One is at UC Davis and the other is in Sacramento. We encourage you to join us for these Bolder Future Summits where we'll hear from one of our speakers who's working on a youth manifesto for the future of California. Next slide, please. So what I'll be talking about today is, we do a lot of work using demographic data as well as policy data, but perhaps where we have been privileged to be in a leadership position is to produce regular surveys of our community, and importantly, in partnership with the Associated Press. This is important because it's not just data to gain insights, but to make sure that we're informing news coverage and ultimately shaping public perception. And part of that has been that for too long, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities have not been part of news coverage. So if you read stories about economic affordability being a top concern, often they will have breakouts for white, Black, Latino, or Latina communities, and then either other or just our communities are entirely missing. We make sure that we are part of that conversation and of that conceptualization of who is American and who is Californian. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we do have an embarrassment of riches now. We just have so much data. And so part of the way that we try to make sure that everyone knows how to access them in organized ways is through these resource guides. So if you just go to our main page, you'll see a button that says resource guides. So you can get all the data that combine, for example, on health, right? Health outcomes data, population data, as well as attitudinal data and some policy background. We also have data that pull together just our public opinion data across a range of issues. And we're thrilled to have created this resource called 1 in 5 Priorities of AAPI Californians, where people can go and just grab some of the key information that they need. One of the resources there is a partnership that we had with the California Commission on API Affairs last year, which is a fact sheet on key population facts that you need to know as well. Let's go to the next slide. So here's some key findings, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. So next slide. One, affordability is the top priority. This is true nationwide. It is true in California. Cost of living and jobs dominate the concerns of API Californians. However, in our most recent survey data, we see that war and foreign policy is number 2. Now, even that has an economic component, as we'll see later on, where essentially Californians want to see more spending on health and education and less spending on immigration enforcement and on the military. Healthcare, immigration, and rights and freedoms are also major concerns, as we will see. Housing or rent is the top affordability concerns for API adults in California, followed by healthcare, underscoring the compounding financial pressures that our communities face. When it comes to taxes, Californians, similar to APIs nationally, believe that higher income households pay too little in federal taxes. And when it comes to spending, we have 70% saying that the government spends too little on improving the healthcare system. Next slide. So on healthcare, we have many findings. We encourage you to check it out in the resource. But healthcare insurance companies don't fare too well. Nearly 3/4 of API adults, California and nationally, the results are very similar, say that health insurance companies are extremely responsible or very responsible for high healthcare costs. You also see strong cross-partisan majorities supporting government limits on hospital charges, including API Republicans. Finally, when it comes to immigration, 2/3 of API adults say that Trump has gone too far on deportations. And let's go to the next slide. And you see large majorities opposing aggressive enforcement tactics, including allowing immigration agents to cover their faces. In more recent data, we also see strong support for mandating body cameras for immigration agents. And then finally, when it comes to education, California has the best public university system in the world. And we see that an overwhelming 87% of API adults nationally and 91% in California say that a four-year college degree is essential for getting a job that can comfortably support a family. We also see that concern about student loan debt is very high, and we'll dig into some of these findings in a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. Now, before we get to all the priorities, here's another major finding from a recent survey that we did, which shows, this was in late March, we had close to a majority of our community that had not made up their mind on who they would vote for governor. Among those who had made up their minds, Tom Steyer had the most, but even then, it was 14%. See a major gender gap. Just look at that, 56% of women who are adult citizens who are Asian American Pacific Islander in California don't know. If you do the math, right, so you have about close to 1 in 5, so 19% eligible voters, close to half of them say don't know. So for any candidate, that's about 9 percentage points. That's the persuadability section in our community that still exists, at least as far as late March was concerned. We hope that candidates, parties, and anyone else takes our community seriously, because elections will be won or lost depending on whether people reach out to our communities in meaningful ways. So what do our communities care about? Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Like I said, cost of living and inflation. So the patterns are very similar between California and nationally, both in terms of rank order and the proportion. Now, part of that is because California accounts for 30% or so of the national Asian American and Pacific Islander electorate. So that's something to keep in mind. War and foreign policy is a close number two. Then you see the rest of the factors there. This is not to say some of the factors that are further below are not important. It's just that the economy and war are just dominating people's minds right now. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when it comes to the economy and government priorities, I'll just show a few data points. Housing or rent and healthcare are really important, and especially housing in California. Over 2/3 say that is the most significant concern when it comes to affordability. Healthcare, food, and groceries. So these are things to keep in mind when we think about what Californians are struggling with, including Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California. Next slide. When it comes to taxes, chances are we're going to have a ballot measure. Now, we didn't ask specifically about that ballot measure, but Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders believe that those in higher income households are paying too little in terms of their fair share of taxes. Now, this is about federal taxes, but my guess would be if we asked a similar question about state taxes, the answers would likely be the same. Next slide. By the way, it's really important because people might think of if you have that crazy rich Asian stereotype, and even if they are crazy and rich, they do support higher taxes. And we've seen that consistently over the years in our community. When it comes to federal spending priorities, we see that the priorities of our community are completely opposite to what we're seeing coming out of the White House and who controls Congress. Our community believes that we are spending too much on immigration enforcement and on military and defense, and too little on healthcare and education. Next slide. Finally, the reconciliation bill. This is a study we did last year, and it shows you how important it is to reach out to our community. This is a survey experiment. It means that different people taking the survey were presented different pieces of information. 1/3 of the survey was only presented with information about benefits in the quote unquote big beautiful bill, including extension of tax cuts, removing taxes on tips, etc. 1/3 only heard about the negative aspects in those bills. And then 1/3 heard both benefits and costs. What this shows you is that those who only hear about the benefits of the bill, close to 40% of them support it. Now, this just underscores the importance of outreach to our community. And those who engage our communities early and often will have an advantage. So no one should be resting on their laurels to think that just because our communities hold certain values and have certain priorities, that that is going to translate into what vote choices look like in particular elections. Next slide. To say a few words about immigration, let's go to the next slide. We see a fair amount of differences in terms of whether Trump has gone too far. We see that those aged 18 to 34 are those most likely to say that the Trump administration has gone too far when it comes to deportations. Partisanship often emerges as an issue, as a predictor as well in terms of opinion. Let's go to the next slide. Now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to cycle through this. I've already talked about some of the findings. Strong opposition to allowing immigration enforcement agents to cover their faces. Let's go to the next slide. Military National Guard, you see some strong opposition there as well. Age ends up being a factor, but what's fascinating is that that opposition is not only among those 18 to 34, but also among those 65 plus. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of conducting large-scale immigration operations, such as what we saw in the Los Angeles area and more recently in Minneapolis, significant opposition across the board, including among those age 18 to 34, and again, among those age 65 and older. Next slide. When it comes to healthcare, let's go to the next slide. Who bears responsibility for high costs? Very few, not very few, but comparatively few blame healthcare providers. They're more likely to blame pharmaceutical companies and private health insurers for high healthcare costs. Next slide. In terms of concerns about losing health insurance, we see significant concern here. This is data that we collected in December of 2025. And you see that when you add the extremely concerned and somewhat concerned, well over a majority are concerned about losing health insurance. Next slide. And by the way, it's across the board bipartisanship. Concern about paying for medications. We see this across the board as well. Next slide. Now, in terms of policy support, having government place limits on hospital charges, we see support across the board, including among API Republicans in California. Next slide. On education, a few more slides here. We see significant concern about free speech restrictions on college campuses. And this shows you the breakdown. Now, it stands to reason that those aged 18 to 34 might be most concerned, but you see concern even among those that are older, 65 plus. And importantly, you see concerns among those who do not identify as either Democrat or Republican. Next slide. When it comes to the value of a college degree, we see significant support across the board, not only for the economic value of a college degree, but look at what we see in the bottom, right? Being an informed and engaged citizen. We see that over 80% say that it's either essential or important to that an important function of a four-year college degree is to produce more informed and engaged citizens. Next slide. And then finally, when it comes to student loan debt, we see significant concern across the board, but age certainly plays a role here, especially among those aged 18 to 34. Next slide. So that's just some of the findings that you'll see in our resource. And we hope that you check it out. And especially those who are in positions of decision-making power, thinking about investments and outreach for our communities, not just when it comes to candidate campaigns, but when it comes to issue campaigns heading into November, that they take our communities seriously. They know who we are, they know what our values and priorities are, but they also know the importance of outreach, because as the split sample experiment shows, if you don't reach out to our community, they might not vote in the way that you think they will vote. So with that, I'll turn it back to Annie.
Thank you so much, Karthik. I learned so much from you, and it's fascinating. All that data about our voting proclivities and the things that we care about. I think it's a lot of rich discussion topics, and I think that our panelists who are coming next will talk about how do we create action out of data and translate what you've shared with us into real meaningful change for our communities. So this next section will be speed talks from brilliant folks, and I get the honor of introducing each one. So first we'll have Manjusha Kulkarni, who is the co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate and the executive director of AAPI Equity Alliance. Welcome, Manju.
Thanks so much, Annie, for that introduction. And so wonderful to be on with Assemblymember Patel, State Senator Cabaldon, along with my fellow panelists, Khadijah, Gabriel, Roy, as well as Karthik and Annie, who've worked so hard on the policy platform that I'll be sharing today. As Karthik noted, AAPIs make up 1 in 5 eligible voters in California. So we're a powerful voting bloc that statewide candidates really need to consider. Through the new Mosaic Coalition, we have created a statewide policy platform for leaders to really help them understand AAPI communities and legislative and policy changes that we need. I want to just start by explaining what Mosaic is. Mosaic, or the movement Solidarity Among AAPI Communities, it's a powerful new formation of Asian American and Pacific Islander organizations that are working to unify, connect, and mobilize communities and build a just and humane California. Mosaic members consist of my organization, AAPI Equity Alliance, as well as AAPI Data, AAPIs for Civic Empowerment, Education Fund, Asian Law Caucus, Advancing Justice, Southern California, CAA, EPIC, and OCAPICA. In terms of the policy platform, it's really the first ever attempt to harness the expertise and reach of major AAPI serving organizations across the state. And the top recommendations, and this is what's really important for today's conversation, our top recommendation is to renew California's investment in the Stop the Hate program. In response to violence and hate against our communities during the pandemic, the API Legislative Caucus, the state legislature, and the governor approved a historic API equity budget, which led to a 4-year, $140 million investment in a social safety net of 180 trusted community-based organizations to help Californians, including Asian, African American, Indigenous, Latinx, as well as LGBTQ, PI communities, Muslim, Jewish, and people with disabilities really heal from the hate and return to work, their school, and communities. Right now, AAPI Equity Alliance, along with our other regional leads, that includes the Center at Sierra Health, Asian Health Services, OCAPICA, and Catalyst of San Diego. We are leading an effort right now in Sacramento to renew the Stop the Hate funding. In addition, our other recommendations in the policy platform of Mosaic fall under three buckets, or into three buckets, I should say. First is to protect the vulnerable. These recommendations are related to health and human services, housing, the labor and workforce, which really are basic necessities that our communities continue to still struggle with. Second is to strengthen democracy, and that includes recommendations to protect and expand civil rights, voting rights, and government services, all that are really under attack under our current federal administration. It also includes securing language access, data disaggregation, and increased representation. And lastly, it is to invest in equity. And that describes those parts of our recommendations which advanced inclusive education, resilient built environment, as well as fair and sustainable revenues, which is really important as we are looking at a budget deficit this year. So this is what's included. I encourage everyone to take a look at the policy platform and to please share it widely with lawmakers as well as with candidates, so we can get out the word about what's important to our communities and make sure that we're included in their policy agendas. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Manju. Next, we've got Khadija Alam, who is the Executive Director of the California Commission on Asian Pacific Islander Affairs. Welcome, Khadija.
Thank you so much, Annie. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you to the API Data and Kappa and all of my fellow panelists who are dear friends as well, for bringing forward today's conversation, bringing forward the data and timely surveys that reflect what our communities are actually experiencing. At the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs, our role is to ensure that our voices don't just stop at awareness, they translate into action. We serve as a bridge between community voice and state government, advising the governor and the legislature on how to respond to the real needs reflected in data and lived experiences. That's why our work focuses on turning visibility into impact. Through our advisory committees, statewide listening sessions, policy summits, and ongoing engagement with higher education institutions, as well as AAPI students and community leaders, community-based organizations, we gather input directly from the communities we serve. This ensures that our policies we advance are not only data informed, but rooted in lived experiences and aligned with the needs of our communities. Because in a pivotal election year like this, we're talking about AAPI communities who now make up 1 in 5 eligible voters in California. I was surprised to hear this. 1 in 5, that's nearly 20%. Our average AAPI communities represent over about 7 million Californians. That's about 15-16%. So we're a little above that in terms of our average when it comes to electorate. So that's really interesting and, really good to hear through the survey. So nearly 20% of the electorate, that's influence. That is influence. That's 20% represents a significant share of voters whose views, needs, and concerns must be heard in this election year. And this survey makes clear that AAPI communities are paying attention, they're engaged, and they're deeply concerned about the issues shaping our everyday lives. What stands out for me most from the survey 2026 API policy priority surveys is the clarity of those priorities. Affordability continues to dominate. That's no surprise. But right behind that, which I found interesting, but I was not surprised because I myself hear that in the community that I live in, that I speak to, that surrounds me, that we are seeing strong concern identifying war and U.S. foreign policy and freedom of speech as one of the major issues. At the same time, communities are calling for stronger investments in healthcare and education and expressing concerns about how public resources are being allocated. And we're also seeing growing attention to long-term stability, including how emerging issues like artificial intelligence may impact equity and access. These are real jobs that may not exist in the near future. So that's real fear in a lot of our communities. What this tells us is that AAPI voters are not focused on one issue. They're thinking broadly about economic stability, global events, and the long-term well-being of our communities. And this is where I think there's an important takeaway for candidates in this election cycle. We're not disengaged. We're still processing, right? So you got to show us what you can do for us. There's still time. We're paying attention, we're weighing our options and looking for candidates who actually speak to our realities, our values, our lived experiences. Are candidates going to our communities to listen? I'm not sure about that yet. We at the commission move from engagement to action by working with communities to identify priorities, pursuing those priorities through policy, and supporting implementation to ensure they deliver real impact. So we engage from A to Z, I believe. That includes, we're so proud to be doing this in partnership with Dr. Patel, AB 1878, the bill that we're sponsoring along with API Data, which strengthens disaggregated data collection so communities are fully seen, which includes AB 2374 by Assemblymember Fong, which advances support for AAPI students in higher education that directly came from the work of our Higher Education Advisory Committee, our Vice Chair Karen Makapugai. It also includes programs like Stop the Hate, like Manju mentioned. One of our biggest priorities this year, and the only budget priority that we have this year, is ensuring that we continue the investments in Stop the Hate that the state made at the historic level. We're partnering with community-based organizations to deliver prevention, direct services, and resources to communities across California. Stop the Hate is one of the programs that we oversee in partnership with Department of Social Services, and we're very proud to see and ensure that implementation of that program is doing justice to what was intended in the first place. So the question becomes, what does it take to earn our support as our communities? And I know we'll get into that later, but I very much look forward to having that conversation, that dialogue with my fellow panelists. What will it take for our communities to be visible in this election year?
Thank you so much, Khadija. The Commission is such a great partner and leader in this work, and part of the reason I think our communities and the struggles that we're facing get airtime with our government agencies. So thank you so much. Next up, we have Gabriel Young. Gabriel is a Master's of Public Policy candidate at the UC Berkeley Goldman School of Public Policy. Welcome, Gabriel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annie, and hello, everyone. It's truly an honor speaking with heavy hitters that I look up to on this panel. And so, as Annie mentioned, my name is Gabe or Gabriel Young, and I'm a Master's of Public Policy student graduating in almost 2 weeks from UC Berkeley. And I've been working with AAPI Data on this Bolder Futures project, centralizing around how we can operationalize youth visions of a bolder future to become a bolder present. And this comes from my background from my near completion, as I mentioned, in my MPP curriculum, but also my previous experiences in federal, state, and local government. And so Karthik did bring it up earlier, but I want to retell what Bolder Futures is. It's an API data project centered on ANHPI youth voices seeking to answer what does Gen Z and future generations seek to grow into in California. And we did this that over the past few months, API Data has supported driving a youth-authored and centered ANHPI Youth Policy Manifesto that will lead to our Bolder Future Summit at UC Davis and Sacramento from May 17th through 18th. If you didn't scan the QR code earlier, you can go to the social media pages and do so then. I'd also like to shout out my fellow Goldman School alumni, Roy, who will be speaking later on, as he also helped with this vision operationalization. Oh, that's a mouthful. But diving deeper into what the manifesto sessions actually did. So we collected a lot of AANHPI youth across the state and helped focus them on envisioning that bolder future, drafting bolder solutions, and drafting bold strategies and commitments. As you can tell, they're very bold. So these youth name priorities across civic engagement, housing, education, health, immigration, funding, and civil rights. Everything that Karthik mentioned was a priority earlier. And so where I came in with my former federal government, state government, local government experience is translate those youth visions into clear policy recommendations. You're asking, who has the authority to do that? What agency or institution would act? What funding is needed? What laws or mandates could make it durable? And how do we protect smaller A and HPI communities from being overlooked? And the most important motivation behind asking these questions wasn't how do we tame down youth voices and ideas, but how do we make bold ideas actionable? How do we move from youth voice to youth power? How do we move from listening sessions to activation, representation to recommendation, one-time programs to sustainable infrastructure? And as you heard on this webinar today, ANHPI Californians are a major voting bloc, 1 in 5, and we also continue to be undecided in this upcoming election. So it's important within this election cycle that youth voices and their issues are pertinent to these candidates: cost of living, affordability, healthcare, immigration, education, community safety, and public funding. This translates to not only holding our candidates and institutions accountable to their ANHPI youth, but how will they answer to the future that will come after them? So as I close, I'd like to leave you all with that the AANHPI Youth Manifesto is not just a document that's a one and done, but it's a testament to the foundation for operationalizing a bolder future that AANHPI youth are dreaming of growing into a bolder present. Thank you so much, and I'll toss it back to you, Annie.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I'm so inspired by the Youth Manifesto, this bolder vision. I really, really enjoyed hearing that. And I think that we really need young people and we need young people to vote and get involved. And clearly they are animated, they are inspired. And now we need our leaders to listen to that next generation. And our last but certainly not least panelist is Roy Tungalava, who is the founder of Pacific Islanders for Progress, and he's also a policy analyst at the Education Trust West. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you so much, Annie, and malolele, everyone. Greetings. My name is Roy Tongilava, and as Annie mentioned, I wear a few hats, but in this webinar, I'm happy to share that I'm the founder of Pacific Islanders for Progress. First, I just want to thank Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan for the invitation today, and really shout out to all my co-panelists for all of the great work that they're leading. I also want to give a shout out to the Boulder Futures Incubator, some of the projects that Gabe spoke to, and for their support of this project too. So, as was shared, we know that AAPI communities represent nearly 1 in 5 voters in California this year, which is a huge milestone, one that's worth recognizing. And issues like education and economic mobility continue to be deeply important for our communities. At the same time, we also know that the data, particularly on student outcomes, continue to show significant disparities for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities across the education pipeline. In California, about 20% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders hold a college degree, despite the promise that we know higher education can provide for economic mobility and long-term opportunity. We also know that fewer than half of Pacific Islanders who graduate from our public schools complete A through G requirements, making them eligible for California's public university systems. And among those who do enroll in community college in our state, many are not making it through to completion or transfer within 6 years. And so these realities make it clear that there is an urgent need to engage our Pacific Islanders from across the diaspora in education advocacy, our civic processes, and policymaking processes that directly impact our students and our families. Pacific Islanders for Progress, or PIP, was created to help address that need. PAP is both a California-based advocacy organization and a statewide grassroots coalition of Pacific Islander educators, parents, students, community leaders, and advocates dedicated to advancing education and economic outcomes for Pacific Islanders across California's education systems and across the cradle to career continuum. We operate from the firm belief that when we come together and we combine our collective expertise, our lived experiences, and our leadership, we can move systems and decision makers toward better outcomes for our communities. And so I'm just honored to help lead some of this work. And I just want to give a shout out to all of our founding coalition partners who continue to make this work possible. We definitely look forward to future opportunities to collaborate and continue to build together, especially as we approach the primary and general elections. And so if anyone would like to connect further, you can reach me directly at roy@pacificislandersforprogress.org. And so just want to thank you all again and pass it back to Annie.
Thank you so much, Roy, as well as Gabriel and Khadijah and Manju for describing how you are leading in this moment in history, in this time that we have now, how you're leading our diverse AAPI communities. And I know we've got some questions, so I will start off with some questions that try to meet this moment because we are in an election year and it is important. And as the data shows, Asian Americans are a huge voting bloc, and many of us are undecided, particularly Asian American women, API women. And so this first question is for Manju and Karthik about these upcoming elections. How can campaigns and AAPI serving organizations ensure that our communities are not only counted, but meaningfully engaged? And what strategies do you see as most critical for overcoming language access barriers, disinformation, and historically low outreach to diverse AAPI populations?
Annie, before I jump on, I see that State Senator Chris
Oh,
Cabaldon
has,
is able to join us, so if we can
oh,
give
yay,
him some
wonderful.
space. So thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, Karthik and Manju. I'm now turning it to State Senator Chris Cabaldon. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Senator Cabaldon represents Yolo, Solano, Napa, Contra Costa, Sonoma, and Sacramento counties. Welcome, Senator. Senator, you are muted.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. It's great to be with you. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. The governor rescheduled a meeting with us just wrapped up, but I'm really glad to be with you. And I understand you already heard from my twin sister in the assembly, Assemblymember Darshana Patel. We're the two of the data nerds in the legislature, and I'm just really glad to be a part of the conversation today. Um, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one this I've been in the state government field for a long time and in the academic field working on both data generally, but particularly on data disaggregation in our communities. I'm one of now just three API senators in the California State Senate. I'm the first Filipino ever to serve in the Senate. We also have one Afghan senator of Afghan descent and one senator born in Korea. Um, and it's an important reminder every day on the Senate floor and in committee that even though we all share the same caucus, we have dramatically different stories to tell, different perspectives to share. And these are just three, our own heritages are just three slices of a community that is absurdly diverse, and with so many emerging stories to tell and old stories that have to be rewritten and narratives that are accepted that have to be interrogated once again. And so this is a very important issue. I've been working on data disaggregation since the 90s, both including as the vice chancellor of the community college system for California, where we achieved some of the early breakthroughs in this space. I happen to now chair the brand new Senate Committee on Privacy, Consumer Protection, and Digital Technologies, and we have primary responsibility for data sharing, data privacy, as well as AI and social media and all the other digital technology work. And so many of these issues are now squarely within our domain, and trying to assure that we continue our work to democratize the data, to make sure that the data is lifting up the needs, but and the progress and the assets in our communities, and that we are simultaneously protecting its security and its privacy, and also using it more and more to strengthen, sharpen, hold accountable programs and policies that are happening in the state. But also, and one other area where I think we are using data even more, which is particularly critical. And it's important for the people of California to understand as well. So last year, I introduced a bill, and it's the kind of my signature bill of 2025, which uh, starting this August, every single graduating high school senior in California, every single one that is qualified for the California State University based on test scores and I'm sorry, GPA and taking the A to G courses, will automatically receive a letter of admission in August to 16 CSU campuses without having to apply. That's more than 250,000 more young people will be formally admitted to CSU than last year. So it's a major breakthrough. It will also help a lot in keeping CSU campuses strong in light of some enrollment decline. So an enormous breakthrough, and a lot of folks have said, like, how did you come up with this idea? Like, how this seems magic. Like, this could never be. And I pointed out that we in the data community, both within the API community and more generally, have been focused on collecting more and more data over time to improve the effectiveness of programs, to root out discriminatory bias and outcomes, what have you. So we've been collecting information about high school students across the state now for a decade that includes course taking and GPA. And we've been doing it for the kinds of things that we probably have talked about on this call before I came, which was how do we hold programs accountable? How do we identify and deal with bias? How do we make them more effective? How do we make them more nuanced for different communities? But as we often do in the data world, we never asked, is there some way we could make this of incredible use to the people themselves, who are the data, like and so when I got elected to the Senate a year and a half ago, there was a question I had. Well, if we're already collecting GPA and course taking patterns, could we imagine, is it possible that we could just automatically determine CSU eligibility and not have Annie or Khadija or Gabriel or Karthik have to go to a website, fill out a form, request their transcript, send a transcript to this, to the university. Like, why do we go through all of that? And I think there's a lot of opportunities for advances in the data space, both in its disaggregation, but also in its use to actually directly help people. Another area where we are already doing this, which has kind of happened outside of any public view, is that today, and this became kind of evident because of HR1 and the threats to Medi-Cal eligibility, because as I'm sure you're all aware, in addition to like direct cuts to Medi-Cal or through Medicaid, but to Medi-Cal from HR1, there's also this really cynical, really evil plank in it, which is, well, we're just going to try to, we're going to try to push you into cracks that you will fall through. So now we have to re-verify twice a year instead of once a year, hoping that you'll miss a deadline, you'll forget, whatever. Now you have to have hours work reports. How many hours did you work that month? There's also a standard of how many hours, which is another whole problem. But even if you are working that number of hours, like getting the validation, whatever, is a big problem. So we said, well, how can we help in that regard? Well, it turns out we have already been, up until HR1, automatically verifying Medi-Cal eligibility for 85% of Medi-Cal eligible Californians. So the vast, vast majority of Californians already don't apply for Medi-Cal. They don't fill out any forms. They don't go to the county to talk to a caseworker. We are using the data systems at the state level that we developed mainly for planning and evaluation and policy purposes to directly intervene and put ourselves in between the federal government and Medi-Cal recipients so that we can simply use that data, fill in all the information that we need in order to automatically verify. So it's another example of where data can do both things at once, achieve all of the policy, justice, evaluation, outcomes that we hope. But it also can be something that there's a direct benefit to folks, and not just a long-term change in policies and procedures. I'm carrying a bill this year that will add hours worked to the unemployment data system so that we can continue to do 85% of the automatic verification. So I think it's a good time to be in the data space in some ways. It's also a hard time because the federal government is using administrative subpoenas and a lot of other tools to corrupt the data systems that we have created and evolved in California to make sure that our programs and our policies work. They're using them to harass, deport, jail people, and so we have both things to do at once, which is secure that data, and I have legislation in that regard as well. But also not stepping away from the potential that effective, safe, secure work on data is also critical. So I'm excited to have this new portfolio. I'm the only former university professor in the Senate. I'm just like really into this work, as I know all of you are. I would say just highlight one thing that for the MENA population, for the Middle Eastern North African population in state, you may have seen. I don't know if it already come up in this conversation that the governor has proposed in the budget I don't want to describe it as a rollback, but it's kind of a rollback. It's a delay and some changes in legislation that passed last year with respect to disaggregation of data for Middle Eastern and North African Californians. And we're working on that right now in both with other members of the API caucus. But it's just a reminder that, as you already know, that this work never stops. And that we're going to, even the wins that we have to continue to secure while we press forward to broaden them more as well. So happy to if it's your plan for the afternoon to take questions, or if not, then just to say thank you for your continued advocacy work and then producing meaningful, powerful results for policy, for programs, and for people.
Thank you so much, Senator Cabaldon. I think what you have described is essentially how do we make government work for the people? How do we make our existing processes, the data that we have, how can we make it work for our AAPI communities and for all communities? And in that vein, who is in government really matters. And ballots have dropped. I've got my ballots. June election's coming up, November's coming up. And so, Manju, my first question is for you, although if others on the panel want to take it, please feel free to chime in. How do we ensure that AAPI communities are not only counted, but meaningfully engaged between now? I mean, honestly, it should have started yesterday. It should have started months ago through November and Election Day.
Well, thank you so much for that question, Annie. I think civic engagement has to be at the top of our to-do list as CBOs. I'm proud to say AAPI Equity Alliance has had a civic engagement committee for a long time, and it's proved so important and so effective. Actually, in the June 2024 primary, you won't believe this, there were no vote centers in Koreatown and Chinatown of Los Angeles. And so because our civic engagement committee was already ready, we were able to reach out immediately to the registrar's office and ensure that that was turned around right away. It really was actually 4 years ago to this date, now in the middle of May, after the ballots had been released. So it's that, it's language access, it's having voter guides to even just explain what these ballot measures mean and to have the explanations as much as possible in language. It's hard to understand them in English. So it's very hard for those who are limited to English speakers to understand them. So I would just say like that part is key. Also proud to say that, we, as part of that, have policy staff and, organizations that are out there need to do the same. Alton Wong has just joined our team. We have working on local and state issues, and we have Kelvin in DC. And so those pieces are important as well, bringing the federal piece in, as the senator mentioned, as well as some of the local and state policies so we can respond to all of it.
Thank you, Manju. Now, looking ahead to 2027 and beyond, Roy, how can AAPI communities, particularly Pacific Islander voices, move from being consulted to actively shaping California's governing agenda?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Annie. Looking ahead to 2027, I see a lot of opportunities for Pacific Islanders in becoming increasingly engaged in shaping public policy broadly, including California's governing agenda. To your question, I think there are feasible ways for our communities to actively shape policy. In practice, that looks like moving away from inviting Pacific Islanders to provide input and feedback to really trusting Pacific Islanders to lead, to co-design solutions. It also looks like creating opportunities for that meaningful engagement, investing in community-led research, and ultimately moving from the status quo to really empowering Pacific Islanders to be active parts of our democracy. And so I think we have our work cut out for us.
Thank you, Roy. I love that. Not the consultation or review at the end, but at the beginning, co-designing. And Khadijah, how will the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs build sustained political power and influence on policy priorities and ensure, this is what I think is most important, ensure accountability after elections because they court us, but then they ignore us?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a very critical question. And because building political power doesn't start or end with elections. And that actually goes both for candidates and, and for our community too. Our civic engagement doesn't begin and end at voting, right? It goes beyond that. So how do we engage? So it's really built through consistent engagement before, during, and after elections. Look, at the commission, our job is to educate. educate our communities about what's happening at the state level, in the legislature, in the department, in agencies. And it's also our job to educate the state, the same agencies, elected officials, the governor's office, how and what needs to be taken action on and how, because that's what we're hearing from the communities. At the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs, we will focus on three key areas: strengthening the connection between community voice and state decision making. So that means we work very closely with community-based organizations, as I've said, advocates, local leaders, to ensure that we are hearing on the ground what is directly informing, and directly informing our state policies. These are not isolated concerns. They reflect how AAPI communities are experiencing both local and global challenges in their everyday lives. And we actually hear and see that in this survey. Our issues just don't stay they're not domestic, right? Only they're also very international, foreign policy and everything, for example. Second, advancing policy that reflects those needs. As I mentioned, the bills that we're sponsoring, and we're so proud to be in partnership with our elected officials. And third, ensuring accountability. And I think that gets to your point. Our role doesn't stop when a bill is passed or election ends. We continue to work with state agencies, partners to ensure that those commitments are implemented, and Stop the Hate grants and student achievement program at community colleges and CSUs are a perfect example of that implementation effectively, and that resources are reaching the communities they were intended to serve. And accountability isn't about passing policy, it's about making sure those policies deliver real results for our community. And speaking of accountability, sustained political power comes from consistency, from showing up at every stage of the policymaking process and ensuring that AAPI communities are not just part of the conversation, but actively shaping the outcomes. We're able to see those see through the whole spectrum from A to Z at the commission. Our commission is committed to our communities. Our commissioners are very connected to the appointees. That's the governor, that's the speaker's office, that's the Senate President Pro Tem's office. And when those are the realities people are facing, broad, I have to say, I want to end with, just ensuring that I'm also communicating with, candidates at this point too. Like, broad messaging is not going to cut it. We're not a monolith as a community, right? Our Swana communities, our East Asian communities, we think very differently about how we want to vote. So really engaging our communities where they are, seeing them for who they are, it's just really, really critical at this point for our candidates to think about.
Thank you so much, Khadijah. I know we're a little over, and so I still have a question for Gabriel Young and a closing by Karthik. And I appreciate folks who are able to stay on. But Gabriel, we heard Manju just talk about how CBOs really need to engage in civic engagement. We just heard from Khadijah talk about how this actually has to be a year-round and not just contingent on elections. Obviously, CBO work cannot continue without sustained funding. So how do we ensure that the CBOs on the front lines of providing direct services to our communities have that financial support that they need to continue operating?
Yeah, no, what a loaded question. Thanks, Annie. And transitioning away from my Bolder Futures 25-year-old youth advocacy hat to my diligent master's hat, my coursework and research has concluded that these CBOs are not just direct service providers, but they should be seen as civic infrastructure. And I might go a little long here because, again, money makes the world go around, but please stick with me, folks. So, again, the entire premise of this webinar was with 1 in 5 eligible voters being AANHPI, it's almost evident that undecided AANHPI voters and members will rely on these CBOs as trusted messengers to communicate to them or even advocate for them on the issues that Karthik brought up. It is this civic infrastructure that government and our candidates need to realize is crucial for governance. ANHPI's CBOs are the bridge. So as you also understand this new funding ecosystem where funding cuts are coming from everywhere, I think it's important to reframe the question from how can we receive sustained funding to provide direct services, aka how can we get more money? But how can we improve funding systems that match our organizations' operational realities? And so throughout my coursework, I found that power and efficiency to advocate for these systems or more sustained funding isn't always just tied to how large or finance an organization is, which is contrary to common notions, but it's important that our communities know that it's that government attention or visibility, reputation, executive and staff relationships, geographic proximity to DC or Sacramento, administrative capacity, in order to get that funding. So, in other words, if people don't know the work or that you're doing, or even you exist, funding won't come. And that responsibility lies within coalitions or even each other to support each other that we're elevating that work. That funding gap for direct services that we see today doesn't just come also from funding cuts, but also comes that our organizations sometimes don't have the grant writing staff, reporting capacity, development teams, or those direct relationships. So to ensure that CBOs are resourced enough and that we can be providing that direct impact, I sort of concluded that advocacy around expanding grants such as a Stop the Hate grant or 2021 API equity budget need to become multi-year, flexible, general operating support. We can't just go to Sacramento and say, we need funding again. We need to say, we need funding, but not just again, but every year. And then also reduce those administrative barriers. It's hard to fill out those forms. And so how can we make sure that they're more culturally responsive and accessible? How do we make sure we're funding and expanding coalitions like Mosaic, as Manju mentioned, so that the smaller organizations could also be seen and they have the power to elevate those stories? So all in all, if California wants to ensure our community needs are met, we need to think about it like this. And I'm Filipino Chinese, so I love talking about food. But whenever you're at a kamayan or a dim sum table, it's important not just that the table has enough seats, but that the table is well built and large enough to accommodate the food like lechon or dim sum so diners can feel full. So again, a strong enough built table, but also enough food for people to get.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. You've just perfectly encapsulated what it's like to run and lead a nonprofit in California during these times, and those are very practical solutions. So from your mouth to the halls of power in Sacramento, hopefully. And now I will pass off to Karthik for our closing.
Thank you, Annie, and what a treat it's been to listen to all of our amazing speakers, and Annie, for your skillful moderation as well. My heart is full, and especially with folks like Roy and Gabriel who represent the future of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California. It's been a real treat and an honor to not only be a mentor, but to learn so much from them and from others. And for the rest of the speakers on this call, I had no idea that we're going to be talking so much about data policy. I just thought they were going to talk about the important issues to Californians. So that was an unexpected treat, but also you could tell from Senator Cabalden and Assemblymember Patel, they're not passionate about data for its own sake. They see it as a tool for organizing, as a tool for resource allocation. And that's something that I think we all should take to heart, that evidence-based policymaking all point in the consistent direction of why it is critical for California not only to listen to and care about its Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander populations, but it is a strategic interest for the state of California to pay attention to and to invest in our communities. We saw this during the flare up of hate, and much of it that still exists. Places that get belonging right are more likely to attract and retain talent. During between 2010 and 2020, California lost population for every single racial group except for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So that's what it means to create a state of belonging, and it is really incumbent for all of us to ensure that we bring not only good research and data, but also the community expertise and leadership, and to make sure that people are not only heard, but actively invited in to make sure that our communities are respected, that we are recognized, and we are prioritized in all positions of decision making. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to continue these conversations through the fall. There are so many important decisions to be made, and importantly, to help set the agenda for the next governor of California. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you in future events.